to our webinar concerning the launch of the GEM Sustainability and Entrepreneurship Report for 2023-24. And I'm just going to get going quite quickly now. We are accompanied here today, but before I get to our panelists, I'm just going to talk briefly about our core authorship team, on all the core authors that worked with us on this report. It really is quite a feat each time that we produce a report at GEM, because as you can see from the listing here, it involves people from many different countries. And so it is a really global collective effort to produce something that reflects the global situation. Now, entrepreneurship is a global phenomenon. It fuels economic growth, it drives innovation, it creates jobs, and one of the other things that it does is it tackles global challenges. So GEM has set itself the task of actually looking at sustainability as a growing concern for entrepreneurs and in the mainstream, and that includes social entrepreneurs, but also all other entrepreneurs, because we are very fortunate at GEM to be able to source our data from the entrepreneurs themselves across the board in the various phases of the development of their companies, from startup to established business to high growth, eventually high growth. For those who are not too familiar with GEM, GEM is a network consortium of national teams. We are primarily associated with top academic institutions, and we carry out survey-based research on entrepreneurship and entrepreneurship ecosystems across the world. And we are the only global research source that collects data directly from the entrepreneurs themselves. Next slide. And so I'd like to just briefly introduce the speakers that we have here today. I myself am the Executive Director of GEM. We also have with us Daniel Nowack, who is the Head of Social Innovation at the Schwab Foundation, which is closely affiliated with the World Economic Forum. The Schwab Foundation supported us in the production of this report, and we're very grateful for that. Maya Dougoud is a report co-author. She hails from Switzerland. I myself am working from Switzerland. The two of us are here in Switzerland. And then we have Cesare Riillo, who is a report co-author as well. He works out of Luxembourg, representing GEM Luxembourg. The sponsors for this report, as I mentioned, were the Schwab Foundation for Social Entrepreneurship. Again, thanks. The Bertelsmann Stiftung Foundation, the Cartier Women's Initiative, and the Haute École de Gestion, or School of Management in Fribourg, Switzerland, which is the institution at which Maya resides. Now, GEM has been producing data that informs discussion around the contribution of entrepreneurship to alleviating major social and environmental issues practically since the beginning. GEM has always had something to say about how we are doing in this world in terms of alleviating poverty through entrepreneurship, for example, but on many different aspects. And we have produced in the past reports on social entrepreneurship in particular. But as I say, this is our first sustainability and entrepreneurship report. What enables us to actually produce this report are some added questions on our survey instruments introduced in 2019 and also in 2021. And this has enabled us to produce this first report this year on sustainability and entrepreneurship. Next. So, well, as I said, Global Entrepreneurship Monitor has an established methodology. Is highly recognized across the world as being highly credible in terms of its global coverage and the rigor of its approach. What we have been looking at is making sure that we understand sustainability as a growing concern for entrepreneurs, and on understanding whether sustainability is actually perceived as increasing business opportunities for entrepreneurs. And underlying the report, of course, is the question, or the very key question, as to whether entrepreneurship is a key mechanism for making progress on the Sustainable Development Goals. And you'll actually hear more about that from Cesare later, and also Maya, I think. Now, very briefly, I'm going to bring you through some of the contents of the report, just a flavor really, because it is actually a very comprehensive report covering multiple aspects of the integration of sustainability into the strategic thinking of entrepreneurs. But what we are going to mainly cover here in the next few minutes are entrepreneurial motivations, the prioritization process that entrepreneurs go through for their sustainability goals within the strategic planning of their enterprises, how entrepreneurs actually self-report their activity in terms of walking the walk, and how they prioritize sustainability into their entrepreneurial strategies. We will also talk about an integration of elements that indicate the emergence, perhaps, of what we are calling sustainable entrepreneurship. We'll also briefly look at the entrepreneurial ecosystems for sustainable entrepreneurship, again, just a flavor. And then we'll talk about some policy recommendations that could come out of some of our findings. Now, as regards motivation, to make a difference in the world, well, most of our entrepreneurs interviewed, in each of our participating economies, at least 50% of new entrepreneurs either somewhat or strongly agreed with the motivation that the reason they are creating business is to make a difference in the world. We find that that's a very uplifting finding. There is substantial variation across participating economies, but it does show that entrepreneurs are basically on the bandwagon in terms of, wanting to actually, they're wanting their business to actually make a difference. Next. In terms of prioritization of sustainability goals, according to the national experts that we interviewed, national experts were rating satisfactory or better in around 4/5 of participating economies in terms of, how entrepreneurs prioritize their sustainability goals. The highest scores were actually in India, Indonesia, and Ukraine in terms of low-income economies, then Taiwan, Latvia, and Greece in terms of medium-income economies, and the United Arab Emirates, Sweden, and Norway in terms of the high-income economies. In terms of self-reported activity, early stage entrepreneurs are taking steps to minimize the environmental impacts of their business. Many entrepreneurs are taking steps towards achieving their sustainability goals. And the steps to minimize environmental impacts are somewhat more likely than steps to maximize social impacts, which is, often the case because environmental impacts are often a lot more measurable than social impacts. An interesting finding, for policymakers to keep an eye on, established business owners were more likely than early stage entrepreneurs to have taken steps to minimize environmental impacts. And this basically means that there's quite a challenge about keeping those intentions and activities in place once you become an established business. In terms of prioritization of social and environmental impact, a majority of early stage entrepreneurs and established business owners claim to prioritize social and environmental impacts above profitability in their activities. Entrepreneurs in high-income economies were actually least likely to agree that they do this, that they prioritize social and environmental impacts above profitability. But many economies in the Latin America and Caribbean region were likely to agree. So this is an interesting finding. One can surmise on what the reasons for that might be. Some may surmise that actually in zones like Latin American Caribbean region, sustainability impacts are very highly visible and highly impacting standards of living and qualities of life. But those are a lot more research would need to be carried out in order to understand that particular result. In terms of what I called earlier sustainable entrepreneurship, what are the elements of sustainable entrepreneurship? The first is sustainability motivation, where, as said before, the entrepreneur identifies making the world a better place as one of the motivations for starting a business. I mean, that said, it would not be the only motivation, as we give a choice to the entrepreneurs that we interview, but this would be a motivation that has been included very much so by, as I said, a majority of entrepreneurs. Sustainability and strategy, that is taking social and environmental implications into account when making decisions. That societal impact is the main target, i.e. that the entrepreneur is prioritizing social and environmental impact over profitability or growth, and that the entrepreneur has taken actions to minimize environmental impact or maximize social impact in the past year. So a combination of all of those elements would produce what we have outlined in the report as being what we call a sustainable entrepreneur. Overall, the conclusions are, if you had to put it in a nutshell, is that there is plenty of evidence that entrepreneurs show substantial appetite for sustainability. This is true across all regions and income groups. But of course, it's not surprising that there would be substantial variation between economies. But as we mentioned, moving from early stage entrepreneurship to established company, the institutional settings or the business contacts may put the idea of having continued emphasis on sustainability under pressure as the venture develops over time. Okay, next. So although we are not normative at GEM and we don't necessarily say to governments, by the way, governments are mostly the sponsors of our research at the national team level. We don't tend to be normative. We don't tend to say, well, this is what you have to do. But we thought just for this webinar that we would put together just a few kind of suggestions for the policymakers. But of course, as you will see in a moment when we talk with Maya and Cesare, in particular, action at a policy level has to be very locally oriented. But in general, you could say that prioritizing sustainability as an overall policy objective is helpful, of course, and it helps to develop entrepreneurial ecosystems that actually promote sustainability. Policymakers need to encourage the creation of new sustainable businesses in order for them to adopt sustainable actions and objectives. Customers and suppliers need to be educated about green products and services. In public procurement processes, social and environmental criteria need to be included, and sourcing regulations applied within supply chains. There needs to be a building of competences in sustainability that encourage collaboration and knowledge sharing, and measures, as we said, measuring environmental impacts or environmental activities is somewhat easier than measuring the impact of socially oriented activities. But, you know, I would think that we are in the early stages of measuring impact in some of the areas that sustainability touches, and working and developing these sustainability impact measures is very important in order to encourage new businesses to orient towards sustainability. So I think that gives you just an overview, as I said, just a flavor. We could really go on for the entire hour talking about some of the conclusions of our research. But what I'm going to do first is I'm going to turn to you, Danielle, as you are a non-GEM player here, and you're coming from very much a global perspective, linked obviously to the World Economic Forum. You're coming from the trenches, as it were. And so would you be able to give us your first impressions of some of these conclusions from the research, some of the findings, and then even the policy recommendations? Thanks, Daniel.
Thanks, Aileen, and thanks for having me today. First of all, congratulations to everyone for launching the report today. This first of its kind, right? Aileen, Stephen, Niels, also Maya and Cesare as a co-author, but the entire GEM team and the researchers that put this together. We know that it takes this collective action to make it happen. So big, massive congratulations. And of course, the state of entrepreneurship has been at the heart of also the forum for over 50 years. Entrepreneurship was one of the key values when it was started 50 years ago. And then 25 years ago, 27 to be exact, the Schwab Foundation was launched to actually look into social entrepreneurship. So with this report, we're bringing those two worlds really together. And it's a real honor to be here for this report launch. And I think sustainability and social impact in the current environment need to remain on top of the agenda. I think that we have this report now highlights how far we've come, but I think also when we look into the future, it also is a key asset and a key resource to make sure that we protect the progress we've made in the last couple of years and decades, but also obviously build on that and make further progress. Today, however, we see ourselves in a economic and geopolitical reality where trade wars have broken up between the largest economies. We have stronger polarization and nationalism that seems to actually prohibit collaboration on key sustainability and social impact ambitions. We've seen the shutdown of USAID and significant reductions on the UK aid budgets, which is a really tangible sign that obviously the peace dividend we were all hoping for is no longer actually in play as much, at least. And with that, then ultimately SDGs and the sustainable development we were all working towards is under threat. And I'm going to come to a point here in a minute to see, why is entrepreneurship relevant and important, and especially in that environment. But some of these challenges are also some things that we need to look at from our perspective and understand how we can do our jobs better, in a sense that sustainable development and climate change weren't always able to actually bring along a significant part of society. And with that, we do need to invest into economic ideas that actually allow everyone to see themselves grow in the future. That is a personal growth, but it also economic well-being and economic growth. Because too many people have actually been left out of this transition that we were hoping for to a green and more inclusive economy. And with all of those developments, the decline of aid and at least ODA and development aid, but at the same time also kind of a search for a new economic model that still keeps everybody on board, but also protects our planet and our societies. I think entrepreneurship is the key force to make that happen. And I think especially tapping the root of entrepreneurship when people start their business is so important. I think that's where it's just really, really important to have these insights that you're creating. And then with that, hopefully we develop an entrepreneurship culture that combines financial success with social impact and sustainabilities. So in so many ways, the report couldn't be more timely, also because it gives people hope that we can still make this progress. Has given me hope, certainly, in some of the findings. One of them you just mentioned, that obviously in far more than half of all economies, most entrepreneurs prioritize social and environmental impact, which is a significant sign that the agenda very much is on track, and that we have entrepreneurs that really care about these elements. But it also outlines that sustainability and social impact are not necessarily a Western narrative, right? For many people, for too long, it actually was a narrative of Europe and the US. But your numbers also say that actually sustainability, social impact play as much of a role, in many cases, even a more important role in geographies such as Brazil, UAE, India, China, Indonesia, etc., even ahead of countries like France, the Netherlands, or Germany. And I think that's really an important aspect to also reassure and inform the public dialogue about all of these topics, that, it's a shared responsibility, and it's not just the responsibility that's shared, but also the action is by now shared by so many entrepreneurs all over the world. The report also adds to the growing evidence that there's a lot of efforts being taken across the world. I think I really liked also how it looked into which entrepreneurs took action for sustainability, and the numbers coming out of that. I think that's just also a really important question and an important insight to generate. And so we are really looking forward to deep diving on the data, understanding it, maybe also combining it with other data sets. Because as you said, I think when it comes to policy recommendations, there has been a value-based narrative in the past, largely on sustainability and social impact. And as you rightly mentioned, we need to build a business case for it, the business case, but then also the economic case when it comes to policy development, so that we can go to the ministers of economy, the ministers of finance, and say, listen, independently of the values you support, this work makes sense from a GDP growth perspective, from a well-being perspective, or from a poverty index perspective. So the key topics that you're trying to address in your geography. And I think that's I think we're just seeing the starting point here of the data, because again, you're creating such a rich data set that can be looked at from a longitudinal perspective, but then also in comparison between the different groups of entrepreneurs, those that prioritize, those that don't prioritize. So we're really looking forward to the many ways that we as a sector, but also policymakers and the private sector, can use this data to make informed decisions. Thanks again for all of these efforts.
Thanks, Danielle. I just building on some of what you said, I mean, on these policy recommendations, given the global environment that is out there today, which of course, that has come fast and furious, if you like, over the last few weeks. How difficult do you think it will be to actually enact and apply the type of policy recommendations that are up on the screen right now?
Well, I think actually it is, and in some ways it's actually helpful on a national level, in a sense that when you now look at the gaps that the lack of development aid has been creating in countries that now need to figure out how to actually provide HIV treatment, how to provide vaccinations, and so many other services that are no longer necessarily funded by development aid. There is going to be a big discussion around efficiency and how do you do that in the most efficient way. And we do know that obviously many of the entrepreneurs working on some of these issues, on vaccine distribution, on cooling chains, on the value chains behind it, but then also maybe some of the healthcare centers that are then run in an entrepreneurial way, that they tend to be more efficient in some of these solutions. So I think there will be a hard look of governments around the world at some of these policy recommendations in the effort of efficiency, of creating efficiency. But now, of course, there are going to be geographies where it's less or not as easy maybe to look at these policy recommendations and implement them, rather a bit more of pushback. But I think for those countries that need them the most, some of these policy recommendations absolutely make sense, and maybe today more timely than ever.
Yeah, I think it's very, very uplifting that the primary phases of what you would call innovation, that is the fact that awareness is high amongst entrepreneurs on social and environmental impact, and interest also appears to be high. And from there, we can move to activities also being high, activities in the areas of social and environmental impact. So you also mentioned our longitudinal perspective. I should mention, for the sake of our audience, that GEM has existed for more than 25 years. This year is our 26th year. We celebrated our 25th silver anniversary last year. This means that we have, at this stage, over 120 economies that have contributed to our research. And therefore, it's an incredible database upon which to pull some of the interesting conclusions that we have actually presented here. Of course, we greatly beefed up, to use the expression, beefed up our questions on sustainability in 2019 and then again in 2021. So I think that in the future, as we collect every year, because we have no intention of taking those questions out again, we are going to build up a really interesting and longitudinal perspective on all of these questions around sustainability. And now I'm going to actually move to Cesare, because one of the things that we obviously do after having produced our global report every year is we ask our national teams to focus on their national findings. So we have a great opportunity here today. We have both Cesare from Luxembourg and Maya from Switzerland to show some of the interesting conclusions from their particular countries. So over to you, Cesare.
Hello, everybody. Thank you, Aileen, for having me here, and everybody for having the opportunity as well to contribute to such an important and relevant report. Before looking at Luxembourg, please allow me to have a much global view and share with you my concern about SDGs. Looking at the last United Nations report, we see that 17% of SDGs are achieved in 2024. And compared to 2023, it's 15%. You see that the world as a whole is progressing really slowly towards the goals that were achieved. If we recall that SDG were published in 2015 and are supposed to be achieved in 2030, means that in 10 years we achieved roughly 20% of our goal. And for the next 5 years, we are expected to fulfill 80%. This is a tremendous effort and requires a lot would require much more intensity and focus from all stakeholders, being entrepreneurs, being government, being citizen, being academia. I mean, this is such huge big task that requires the efforts of everybody. Why sustainability? I mean, I like the definition of a Bhutan report that defines sustainability as the ability meet the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generation to meet their needs. And this is really the key of what sustainability means for me, at least. The good news is that we are not alone to recognize that that entrepreneurship may play roles in this. It can be a force of good. The United Nations 2022 voted for a resolution calling for entrepreneurship for sustainable development. then I come from academia, so allowed me to recall always the distinction of Baumel about productive entrepreneurship and other forms of entrepreneurship. So of course we are looking for the good side, the good aspect of entrepreneurship, and they play a role, and they are already playing a role, but requires a lot of commitment. Looking at Luxembourg, I want to say that social and green economy are already playing a major role. Looking at national account statistics, we observe that environmental goods and services sector represents already roughly 5% of the total employment and more than 2 billion gross added value in the economy. You can see that there is a positive relationship between environmental activities and economy. At the same time, looking at social and solidarity economy is representing another 4 or 5% of the economy. These are figures for Luxembourg that are probably not really updated, but more recent figures that are going to be published soon shows that this percentage are increasing. So altogether, there is a movement towards the good direction, but probably the pace is too slow, and we need a lot of we need awareness for sure, a commitment, pledge, but then to walk the walk, to walk the talk. No, walk to really do something, be effective, and it's quite deceitful that a lot of huge companies that pledged to be net zero in 2050 slowly are giving up their this pledge, almost silent, because to recall, the overall world climate looks like it's moving more towards the most fierce competition rather than work together in order to solve problems that are global. Global problem will of course require global solution implemented locally, and I don't know. This is what really I think is important to share. That I was willing to share with the rest of the participants.
Thank you, Cesare. Okay. Do you have any comment, Danielle, on what anything come into your mind, in terms of what Cesare has just said? I'm sure it resonated with you, some of the comments he made around the sustainability goals.
Yeah, no, I mean, as I mentioned in my introduction as well, I think the SDGs are under threat for so many reasons. Obviously, we've also seen it in the last UN session. So yes, in terms of progress, but also in terms of political buy-in, I think there is a challenge for us to actually achieve the SDGs. And but I think we also need to, in addition to that, think beyond 2030. I think a lot of the measures we now have to take are long-term measures, and quite a few of them would actually not take effect until 2030 when it comes to climate mitigation, climate adaptation, but also certain moves. Just think about regenerative agriculture. It takes 3 years for a farmer to really transition to it. So I think we need to look at the SDGs and then beyond. The other element, just to build on Cesare's point, is to say, yes, we need to have the private sector engaged in this, and also continue to commit to net zero goals and to action along those lines. I think the other thing, as I also mentioned, is that we need to invest into actually creating the business case for it. And again, I think there is a need for data to unearth the business case that's already there. And then there is obviously a need for innovation, policy innovation, regulatory innovation, to actually create the business case. Because as much as I would love for everyone to do the right thing out of values and moral tendencies, the real sustainable change and the sustainable action along the lines we want to see does need to come out of a business case, unfortunately. Otherwise, we're not going to be able to sustain it. And I think the other positive thing, just to highlight here, is that actually Luxembourg will host the Government Council on Social Innovation in a few weeks' time already. So we do see a growing interest in the public sector in actually engaging in social innovation, creating those kinds of markets, and to some extent in the Corporate Leadership Council that we've started, and also the Rise Ahead pledge, and on the private sector side to actually engage in this topic of social and solidarity economy.
Right, you really do make a very good point that we must not keep our eyes, or we must keep our eyes on, rather, the business case and the building of the business case, which in fact is multi-pronged. You know, obviously the moral dimension still continues to be important, and one good thing is that we do seem to have a large quotient of entrepreneurs that are bought in, if you like. So that's good. But building a very strong business case, also using data such as GEM data, which kind of bolts the business case into place in many cases, is important. Now, can I just ask people, before I go on to Maya, to, if you have questions, to post those questions in the Q&A, not in the chat, but in the Q&A. Now, we already have a couple of questions there, I think. But Maya, over to you for a perspective from Switzerland. Feels like the Eurovision here.
So thank you also for having me at this virtual table, and I'm very happy to present some key points from Switzerland. Considering that Switzerland is the country for human rights, considering the higher level of education also in Switzerland, I thought it was interesting to have a look at the awareness of the SDGs in Switzerland compared to the global numbers. So awareness of SDGs has increased among Swiss entrepreneurs, rising from 27.3 in 2021 to 35.8 in 2024. This level of awareness exceeds both the global average and the average for high-income countries, suggesting that the SDGs are well promoted and more widely recognized in Switzerland's entrepreneurial ecosystem. I also need to admit that I really want to have a bigger numbers because it's about education, and awareness goes, of course, with the education. But we need to consider, and this is also something we can read in our report, that the lack of awareness of the SDGs is not an obstacle providing new or established entrepreneurs from embarking on actions, strategies, or priorities that integrate sustainable considerations. So it means even if you don't know that you are handling the SDG goals, entrepreneurs implement them. So it's a good sign. We can go to the next slide and have a look now into the impact of these considerations in the decision-making process. So let's have a look at the environmental impact consideration when making business decisions. Switzerland has remained relatively stable and aligned with global and high-income countries level. In 2023, Switzerland reached its highest level, 75.4, and in 2024, the figure stands at 73.6, closely matching the high-income country average and just below the global average. This indicates a solid and constant integration of environmental thinking in Swiss entrepreneurial strategies, what is good. Let's have a look at the second figure. Social impact consideration followed a more dynamic path after a strong start in 2021 with 80.3%. Switzerland saw a decline in 2022 and 2023, but then experienced a sharp rebound in 2024 to 81.5%. This level is significantly above both the global and the high-income average, showing that Swiss entrepreneurs have re-emphasized social responsibility, possibly in response to shifting societal expectation or post-crisis re-evaluation of priorities. However, and let's have a look at the third figure, when it comes to prioritizing social and ecological impact over profitability, Swiss entrepreneurs remain consistently more cautious than their global peers. In 2024, only 53.1% of Swiss early stage entrepreneurs reported prioritizing impact over profits, compared to 60.8 globally and 56.9 in high-income countries. This suggests that while sustainability is evaluated and considered, many entrepreneurs in Switzerland still balance these concerns carefully against financial objectives. So we need also to consider, and this is also something what we can read also in this beautiful report, first report, and this is a bottom-up report that makes this consideration very pioneer, is that we have some population, and this is women, young and graduated people who implement more these concerns of sustainability in the business, and they change the world globally. So that was my points.
Thank you, Maya. You make a very interesting point at the beginning, which I think bears mentioning again, that in fact awareness of the Sustainable Development Goals is obviously not a prerequisite to actually prioritizing social and environmental issues and or taking action. However, what we did find is that where there was high awareness of the Sustainable Development Goals is enabling entrepreneurs to be somewhat more strategic about their prioritization process and their activities. So it is, we feel it's really worth, keeping a finger on the pulse of this, because obviously as we move forward, especially given the geopolitical environment, etc., we will need, entrepreneurs to be more and more strategic about their efforts. Either Cesare or Danielle, any comment on what Maya has just said? Would you like to build on it in any respect, or? Not so much. Yeah, okay. So I'm going to, may I encourage the general audience to please put their questions in the Q&A. And now I'm going to build sort of a picture based on some of the areas, some of the expert insights that you have been sharing. So the GEM report highlights regional variations in integrating social and environmental considerations in entrepreneurship. What do you think are the main factors that are driving those regional variations? Maybe Maya, can I ask you that question? The regional variations that we've been finding.
So what we were able to expose is that we have three levels of countries, the A, B, and the C, and we were able also to see that in the A, they are addressing more SDGs, and they address the energy, the work, the industry, the community, and the consumption. So it's more deeply and corresponding also to the level of to the economical level of the regions. Then the B countries, they address work and the community, the city. It's the 8 and the 11 SDG goal. And in the C countries, they address poverty, gender, work, and also city and community. We were able also to take out of this that also addressing the consideration that Daniel just exposed about what's going on in the world now, we were able also to show that at this stage, all the regions, all the countries, doesn't matter the level, the economical level of these countries, address the importance of the network, importance of the community, importance of the small and local levels of being the change agent. So we are able just to take these kind of data and to give them these interpretations.
Thank you. Okay, Danielle, women, graduates are primarily, they are the, let's say, the primary believers in sustainability, according to our research. Yeah. I'm sure that doesn't come as a surprise to you, Danielle, but how can we leverage the fact that women are particularly strong in integrating sustainability to their businesses, or that young people are also driven in that way? How can we leverage that?
Yeah, that's a good question. Maybe before I answered that, just a quick jump on Maya's remarks just now in terms of the connectivity to communities and the grassroots, because that's in essence that one of the core values that the Schwab Foundation has been working off of, and also then obviously you're featuring a number of case studies in the report, because as much as we're talking about numbers, I think it's always good to get back to the kind of entrepreneurs we're actually talking about. And I think that is something, as we always talk about scale of social impact, scale of sustainability, not forgetting that it needs to be rooted at the community level, and through that also needs to be buy-in an agency. I think that's just critical and really good to have also in the report and featured in the report, and confirmed by, you know, the interest and the focus areas of entrepreneurs. I mean, in digital is one of the case studies mentioned, Michaela Jade there in Australia, trying to bring really the nature and the way to treat nature from indigenous tribes to the mainstream, but at the same time also carry over knowledge of generations from one to another indigenous generation. These are just the very tangible things of how entrepreneurs are addressing social impact, not just even as a byproduct, but even having it as the core of their business. And Michaela or even Nilam or Rodena, the three women entrepreneurs featured in the report, I know that they together have faced many of the challenges that women entrepreneurs actually face when it comes to access to finance, when it comes to the ability to get visibility and recognition on a global stage. So I think there's a number of barriers that can be addressed and need to be addressed to allow these entrepreneurs to thrive. With the data that you have now highlighting that women are more prone to actually take these into consideration, taking the next step then to say, well, you know, are they then also building enterprises that are creating more resilient jobs, that are actually engaging other communities of society that other businesses are not able to engage. With these kinds of insights, we're able to go once again to policymakers to support them, but also to private sector to highlight, well, this is actually an additional impact you can make by collaborating with these entrepreneurs. Similarly, on the youth side, in many ways, also when it comes to financing, there's another study, the Possibilists out there, developed by Changemaker Exchange, which is really good insights into the challenges of young entrepreneurs, in this case, young social entrepreneurs. And again, one of the key challenges is finance, because, you know, investors don't necessarily invest into first-time entrepreneurs. They need to have, you know, started and failed maybe a couple of times to then really qualify as an experienced entrepreneur. That's one of the reasons why they have challenges with getting access to finance. But similarly, we also have challenges with first-time fundraisers that are trying to build investment funds for women or for young people. So there are some structural challenges around the finance that need to be addressed, but they can only be addressed by actually surfacing data like this, and by then combining it also with some of the other indicators that I mentioned, linked to economic progress.
Thank you. I'm actually looking at the Q&A here. Question, I'd appreciate the speaker's insight on the extent to which the international aid, such as USAID, impacts on the entrepreneurial ecosystem of less developed or developing economies. May I stay with you, Danielle, to perhaps give a perspective on that? I know you mentioned this before, but this is actually quite targeted on how does it affect the entrepreneurial ecosystem specifically, and the type of entrepreneur that you've just been referencing.
Yeah, I think it's going to have a significant impact in terms of the support structures, right? Because many of the support structures for entrepreneurs are obviously grant funded. Some time ago, USAID did a really great initiative on GALI, the Global Accelerator Learning Initiative, since we're talking about data that was assessing accelerators for entrepreneurs and to understand which accelerators actually have the biggest positive impact on the entrepreneurial journey. And programs like this, together with an obviously tangible business support services, access to markets, etc. Many of these programs are at risk at the moment. The silver lining to some extent is that when we've been talking with some of our colleagues in country, I think there's a general recognition to say, well, ultimately, we as a country would like to be able to actually provide this ecosystem and this infrastructure. Now, obviously, the nature of how the funding was cut from one day to another doesn't really allow for a orderly transition, and that obviously is going to create turmoil in the ecosystem and the support structures, and also into the grants and financing available to entrepreneurs themselves. But I think in the long term, what this will create, it will create much more push for local financing, banks to get more into actually higher risk investments in a blended finance form, but also into governments putting efforts into actually strengthening the financial sector to provide local finance. Now, this is all not going to be an overnight solution, but that's maybe the trajectory that many countries wanted to take anyway, even before the US aid funding was cut off.
Really, thank you very much. A very comprehensive reply. Cesare, actually, on your interface with policymakers, because of course, and I know you're quite passionate about that. So what have you been noticing or concluding, even if not noticing, but at least concluding? What policies or legal frameworks would you need to see in your experience that would effectively encourage sustainability business practices? What kind of thing are you actually itching for the policymakers to take on? Yeah.
I try always to emphasize the importance of leveling the playing ground. Is that allowed the forces to operate, but it's important that there is similar opportunities, because when two companies are competing for the same market and one takes shortcut or what they call greenwashing or social washing, and they save in the cost compared to the other one who plays according to the rules with good intention. And then what happens is that you are facing unfair competition because you present yourself on the market as equally sustainable. Investors may provide you fund, may not distinguish which one is good, which one, well, good or bad. I mean, here is nothing moral judgment here. It's like who's generally playing correctly and the one who does not. And so I think that greenwashing is a major problem. And what the policymakers have to do is sometimes to set a framework. And there is where I emphasize that it's one planet. And so the solution are implemented local, but they need to be coordinated globally. I'm not so optimistic about the future because SDG were a problem, but I recall as well the Millennium Goals that were running 2015, and they were, I mean, there was some improvement, but much room for improvement is left. I personally have my doubt that in the absence of funding, USAID will be easily replaced by local ones, because if this would have been possible since the beginning, would have not been room for the USAID. So on this, probably I have different sensibility compared to Daniel, but I would love to be wrong, and probably next year we'll see what happened.
Yeah, and just
Well,
to
ahead,
emphasize that I'm not necessarily saying it's going to replace it like that, right? So, but I think again, this is just what we are hearing, is that countries are then now eager to say, how do we build this locally? Obviously, knowing that they're not going to be able to bridge the gap. Just on the whitewashing, on the greenwashing, both aspects. One thing that I think is worth looking out for, and also for the data to maybe inform, is the Financing for Development conference in Sevilla coming up in end of June, July, where impact transparency and with that also regulation around how do you account for impact on the mostly environmental, but also on the social side. How can that actually level the playing field, as you say, Cesare? Because I think that is important. On the flip side of that, we've seen a lot of investments in the last couple of years especially in the private sector, on reporting, and some of that has actually taken away from action. So I think we need to walk a fine line there between regulation that stifles action and pulls actually attention away from it, while also, as you rightly say, make sure that we do have equal rules for everyone in the marketplace.
Right, thank you. I'm looking at a comment from Angus Bomacher Falconer, who is the leader of our South African team. And he makes the comment, well, interesting that making a difference in the world's the highest scores are amongst developing countries. They also have less resources than more developed economies. And how can we interpret this? And then a response from our leader in Poland, Anna Tarnawa, who says, my guess is that it's easier to make a difference in less developed and competitive markets. Again, I think, as I said during my part of the presentation, I think a lot more research has to be done there. But in my past experience of research in corporate sustainability, our findings at IMD Business School here in Switzerland was that because people it's so up front, they're so in front of the impacts and affected by the impacts at a very close level, that raises the awareness and raises the will and the purpose driven instinct amongst the entrepreneurs to actually make that difference in the world. But I think a lot more research needs to be done in that particular area. I just want to, we have a few comments from Dr. Christopher Moon, who has written some work, has done some work on entrepreneurship and the SDGs, in fact, co-authored a book on that. And he points out that research shows that entrepreneurs use more parts of their brain, whereas managers are left brain hemispheric dominant. Quite interesting. My own research shows social entrepreneurs as more empathetic and compassionate, and ecopreneurs more connected to nature than traditional entrepreneurs. Thus, we need more research, more research on creativity and innovation in relation to the SDGs and their impact, and the economic case follows on. And I have a few queries as to why certain countries are missing from our research. This is not unusual. We have countries that fall in, fall out of our research regularly. Well, when I say regularly, we have a very strong contingent of countries that participate, have been participating for decades in our research. But we have obviously some difficulties with getting the research financed in developing countries. So country like Nigeria, for example, we do not have a team there, but if you can help in any way, to give to help us to get a Nigerian team, the person who commented on that, please do be in contact. So we're always interested in hearing from new teams. That's all the time we actually have. Time actually flew during this. It's been very, very interesting. And I want to thank our panelists very much for giving of their spare time to come and speak with us today, and to you. I've just put up some links there if you want to be in contact, particularly about, as I said, teams that are missing from the GEM consortium. We're on a drive right now to collect new teams. We have a partnership with the WIPO, the intellectual property or World Intellectual Property Organization, that works with us on the Global Innovation Index using indicators from GEM, and also helping us and assisting us to get some new teams on board. So, partnerships to get some new teams on board is always interesting for us also. Thank you very much for joining us today. About 120 or so people signed up for this webinar. Over 40 people, I think nearly 50 people were here for most of the duration of it. The others will receive a recording. And again, thank you very much, Danielle, Cesare, Maya, and thanks to Kevin, who organized all of this, and really a great organization. Thank you so much. and see you next time.
Thank you,
Bye.
Aileen.
Thank you.
Thank you very
Cheers.
much.
All.
All right. Bye-bye.